Key, really. Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, so like by a long.
Where do you?
By a long. Okay, Mark, you want to get started?
Yes, I think we'll call this meeting to order. Or you're over there though, but good to have you here in person. Thanks, everyone. I'll start with the roll call. stay present or here. Kavi here. Kelly will not be here, correct?
Correct.
Laura,
Here.
I'm here. Neil,
Here.
Nick.
Yeah, here remotely.
Is down there? Do we have him? Oh, yes, great. Okay. Nick's here. Ray, did Ray make?
He's out this week.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if he was gonna call in or not. Okay, so Ray is not present. Rory?
Here.
Scott?
Here.
And Smita.
Here.
Okay. Do we have ex officios at all? Madeline or
No,
Sasha?
I don't see them.
Okay. I think we're going to the meetings first of all. It looks like we have minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes for February 13th, 24th, and March 13th. Does anyone have any comments on those? Can we do them as a batch, Cassie? Is that
Yeah.
Fine.
And the 224 is from the electrification meeting, but
Any discussion? I forget. Now, do I do a formal vote with a?
we don't have
We
to,
don't have to,
no,
okay.
as long as,
That's what I thought.
if everyone thinks they look good. Right,
Yeah, you can see if yes.
Okay, sounds good. So we'll go to public comment. Doesn't look like we have anyone here. Do we have anyone?
yeah, let me look, there is someone online, so if you are. Oh, and we do have, can you bring over Madeline?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have our ex officio Madeline from the school district, is here virtually.
Oh, okay.
And then we do have some attendees online, so if you are online and you would like to make a public comment, you can use the raise hand function. And then we'll give you the opportunity to speak. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I think we can move on.
So we go to staff updates.
Yes, okay, a couple of updates. The first is, committee member updates. Kelly Jensen let me know earlier this week that she, needs to resign from her seat. She's just had a couple of significant work conflicts come up and doesn't feel like she has the capacity. The timing is good because, that was the scary announcement. Smita, because, Kelly was part of the waste and materials group, and the waste and materials group also, in the last round of terms being up, the waste and materials group went from like a fairly big group to a really tiny group. And Kelly was crucial in the waste and materials group. The timing is good because committee recruitment is launching next week anyway. We do committee recruitment on twice a year for whichever committees have vacancies. So we had one already for Andrew's position. So now we'll recruit 2, and then they should be joining by the July meeting or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, you could, because you're replacing people.
Oh, they can
They
just
can
slide right
just
on.
come in.
Oh, that's great. Okay, cool. So once they're selected, it'll be open from April 14th to mid-May, April 15th, maybe.
Yeah, April 15th to May 15th.
Okay. And then, anyway, so a little bit of shifting on the committee. Another update is just letting you know that I went and I had presented to the council stewardship subcommittee last week and shared with them the priorities for this biennium that we voted on in March, and that was sort of framed as the current council goal framework. I can't remember if I explained this last time or not, but the current council goal framework has sort of a placeholder for implementing the CCAP, and it says like implement CCAP actions based on the committee's prioritization. And that these priorities are forthcoming. And so I shared those 7 priorities as the priorities. They supported those and agreed with those. So we will, the plan is to fold those 7 items into the actual council goal work plan. So they'll each kind of have their own council goal. Some of them already do in a way, like we have one about the VMT reduction one. There was already several actions in the council goals that fulfill that. So we can dive more into that later if you guys kind of want to see how that one is playing out. I think that's the only one that was sort of like already in there. And all the others will be part of council goals.
Hey, Cassie,
Yeah.
would that be like a new thing? I know that the input that this committee has given on council biennial goal setting in the past, it has been largely agreed with and incorporated somehow, but to have our recommendations is like specifically laid out.
Yes,
Is that-
that is different this year, and I've been advocating for that. The main reason being, I mean, obviously, it's just having more kind of visibility to them is helpful, but even from like a work planning and resource allocation perspective, in the past, we've had just the generic, like, implement the CCAP, but the problem is because some of the CCAP some of the projects are these whole big initiatives that require other staff departments to weigh in, or they require budget and resources. When they're just kind of like couched in this general strategy, it's harder to like align all of the work plans and resources from other departments. So my hope is that by building it into the work plan, we're like a little bit more eyes wide open about that in the work planning process. And we're kind of going into the work planning process now. Also, as part of it, is the budgeting, and there were a few items in there that required specific budget. So we did request in the budget proposal that will go to council. We have $200,000 included in that budget request that they will hopefully approve. And then that would go to fund some of those programs. Most specifically, the Climate Action Partner Grant Program, which we're going to talk about later today. And then an additional $50,000 for that we can use for those other actions.
I might also add.
That's all new. Sorry,
sorry.
go ahead.
Just since I was there and heard the discussion, it was interesting to me that the subcommittee was asking Cassie about some of the right of way natural gas electrification and actions, and wanted to hear a little more why we weren't going forward with those.
Yeah. Yeah, and we didn't, so my next. It's a
Sorry,
good
were you gonna
segue.
go to
No,
that?
it's good. It's a good segue because we didn't really talk at in depth about the electrification policy work, which we're also talking about today with you all. My next update is that at next week's meeting, we are it's the council quarterly update, so it's sort of this expanded meeting. The quarterly updates focus on the environment and climate goal area. So we're going to use the goal update time for me to present the CCAP adoption, sort of the whole plan, or the CCAP update, sorry, sort of the whole plan. And then they'll be adopting the CCAP later on in the meeting during the business meeting. And then also during that quarterly update, I'm going to be sharing with them the same thing that we're going to go over today about sort of the planned next steps for the electrification policy work. So that will be, my hope is that that's the time when the council will sort of give their, we'll have that discussion with them where we can kind of explain the plan and why we're doing it that way. And it will be their opportunity to give us direction. So it's possible that from that discussion, they might say like, yep, this looks good, move on as you proposed, or they might say like, actually, we want you to take a different approach for it. So it'll be a good, interesting meeting. That part's all going to happen from 3 to 5 p.m. So we don't need any committee members there for that, like as part of the presentation. But if anyone feels so inspired, it's not a bad meeting to come attend and just hear what the council says. I do believe that whole thing's live streamed too, right? So you can watch online. Another thing that will happen at the April 16th meeting, and this has come up sort of outside of the ECC's work, is that one of the counselors has been asking for more information from our fleet manager about our plan for electrifying the fleet and just kind of decarbonizing the fleet. So fleet electrification, also moving to hybrid vehicles, and then also using renewable diesel, which is a fuel that can just directly replace diesel fuel at a much lower emissions profile. So our fleet manager is going to give a presentation about our kind of approach and plan for fleet electrification and fleet conversion. And then we are also going to propose at that meeting that the council adopt a resolution similar to our all electric facilities resolution from the fall, where they're sort of giving the formal direction and setting the policy that our policy is to replace our fleet vehicles with electric first, and then if there's no good electric alternative, hybrid vehicles. That's for the light and medium duty fleet. So that will be a topic that's introduced on April 16th, and then the plan is to come back to council with a resolution for them to adopt in early June.
It was interesting that the counselor wanted to make sure that we saw that or that the city saw that as a priority for funding that. I was curious if that, how the city budget planning works, if that becomes a priority, if that could impact availability of funds for any other CCAP expenses.
It wouldn't come out of CCAP
That's what I figured,
funds.
but
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know exactly how the fleet budget is set, but it's like a whole different
That's what I
program.
figured.
Yeah. Anyway, so a lot of activity going on, is pretty exciting stuff. And then I wanted to just kind of share an engagement update again. Some of these are similar to the ones we shared last month, but I wanted to share that the website is officially launched. Is this true? Okay. We'll send it out. It looks super different. I think it looks incredible. Megan's done an awesome job working with our comms team. This is sort of the first iteration of a website update because the entire city is going to switch to a whole entirely different web platform in the fall. So this was sort of like, we didn't want to wait until the fall to do our website work. And so they've worked with us to kind of rethink and redo the website using the current platform that we have, but the next one is going to have a lot more capabilities. So anyway, it's also really exciting. We can send a link out.
Yeah, for sure.
So you guys can take a look at it, but it's much more visually appealing. I think it covers a lot of the stuff that you all shared a year ago that you were hoping we did more of. And we'd be happy, to continue taking feedback because we can continue modifying it. Megan is also about to launch our first newsletter. We think we're going to do a newsletter quarterly. That's going to launch later this month. And then
After the council meeting.
yes. Oh yeah, that's right. We're going to do it after the council adopts the CCAP. So that can kind of be part of like the headline. And then also we'll be doing our first outreach event with a table at Earth Day.
Yeah, and our first social media post just went live like 5 minutes ago. That's kind of fun.
Cool.
Could I-
Any questions about any of that?
Yeah, I had a quick question, kind of follow up to kind of what Mark was asking, on the fleet side. That's cool to hear, but I'm also curious about like the cost benefit of like how much additional funding that will require to do versus if that's also the most impactful part of that funding. And I don't know if that's already been, that's like part of if that would be part of how it's implemented. But I would just be curious to know that because it does feel like if that is being put into the electrification side, if there are other programs that could support that could have maybe even larger benefits across the city.
Well, there is-
How much incremental cost there, it's sort of like.
No, so there are cost savings to electrifying our fleet pretty quickly because you save so much in fuel costs and yeah, the fleet manager will go into detail. He's going to sort of like explain that whole ROI,
Okay.
but he said that where there's especially for the light and medium duty fleet, it's definitely a different story when you're talking about the heavy duty vehicles. That the vehicles pay for themselves within like a year or two if they're
Okay.
used heavily, and if they're not used heavily, they still tend to pay for themselves in 4 to 5 years was sort of the range she was giving me. And that's even for the ones where there's like significant differences in cost. In a lot of cases, the increased cost is very small and then it pays back super quickly.
Okay, that's good to hear.
So yeah, I mean, our fleet manager is definitely doing it from a cost
Okay.
justified basis for sure. So it's not taking money from other things. It's going to save us money in the long run.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's good.
It also sounded like it might help encourage some of the EV charger development by the city. Was that at all related to when you were talking about where new EV chargers might go in for the city and like Juniper Ridge and things like that?
Oh, well, he was asking, our new public works campus is going to be set up to charge like a large city fleet. So that was not really public facing chargers, but he was just asking to confirm that that's being planned for the public works campus, which it is.
And even still, just like having that, the more experience the city has doing those things, the easier it is
For
to be
sure.
able to engage in any of those other conversations
Yeah.
about electrifying transportation, which is in our CCAP.
Yeah.
and is a big chunk of our emissions in Bend.
Yeah, and our fleet's a significant chunk of our emissions for the city, too. So like if we switch to like all electric, hybrid and renewable diesel, we could see our transportation related emissions from city operations and facilities would go down substantially. So that's cool that we should be able to see that like in the numbers over the next couple of years. Cool.
That
Any
sounds
other
great.
questions? But if you're interested, watching that work session on it is when the fleet manager will like go into all the details about the costs and anyway, even if there was the cost implications of that, like would almost never be transferred into something we would use for other climate programs, if that makes sense, because individual departments pay for their own vehicles as like their own departmental cost. So it doesn't really cross at all.
Got it. That's good.
Okay, ready to move on?
We're done with the updates?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're ready for more discussion with the borough investment strategy. Jonathan's gonna join us again.
Jonathan's gonna come up and just to
Thank
give
you.
a little bit of context, we had originally last month framed this as wanting to get more feedback from you all on the borough investment strategy. The approach to that project has kind of been evolving over the last month. So today, we're not actually gonna be looking for direct feedback. But Jonathan's gonna give an update on sort of what that project's looking like and then some planned future feedback we won't need. So it'll take a much shorter time than we had originally planned for, which is good. We can use that in our other agenda items.
And just to double check, Cassie, there was no materials shared in advance of this, but
No, because it's mainly an update, and the materials would be the same ones that we had last month, which I guess I could have reshared, but I did not.
okay,
Yeah.
that's helpful.
Okay, are you gonna share?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so first of all, I have to acknowledge Cyrus back there. He's part of this new broader approach. So last time, staff presented to you the borough investment strategy, and one of the conversations was this looked already thought out, fleshed out, and incorporated into existing plans, which it had. But during February and March, we had internal conversations, not only with staff, but our elected officials as well, of how the investment strategy is now taking more of a broader and comprehensive approach to the broader economic development purpose of the city of Bend. And so council gave specific direction to Cyrus and I to integrate the two projects into one. And so now, instead of the investment strategy, which you will still see in the future, you will also now be a part of a process called Invest Bend, which is a community City of Bend project for community prosperity. So basically, this is an economic development strategy, and it will be the first one for the City of Bend. To give you a little bit of background, so in February, we presented not only to this body, but to other bodies, the investment strategy, but afterwards, there was internal conversations that we need to evolve the investment strategy into a broader economic development and comprehensive focus with community prosperity. And then on April 7th, through Cyrus's liaison with BDAB, they initiated work on the proposed framework, and they will begin to outline the focus groups, stakeholders, and identify how they want participation from our citizen advisory bodies. So that will be the only question today is like, what suggestions do you have moving forward? The proposed project is Invest Bend. The purpose, like I said, is to develop an economic development strategy for the next 10 years. The main goal is to identify objectives that cultivate stable, long-lasting, and equitable opportunities for upward economic mobility for all who reside in Bend. The plan will set out a vision for sustainable and economic development. So we already have a framework, right, with the investment strategy. So we are growing this for other areas, including workforce development, climate, environmental resiliency, and disaster preparedness. This will assist with the borough investment strategy and then recommend roles and structures in the future for our city and external partners. The plan will focus on business, people, and place. Business are the primary method of achieving economic growth. We want to focus on providing access to upward area mobility for workers, assist with stabilizing and diversifying the local tax base and reducing tax burdens on residential residents. Some of the example areas we'll focus on over the next year will be to promote entrepreneurial growth, retail and commercial growth, and cultivating the target industries that BDAB and the city of Bend identified this past month. People are the primary reason why we want to enhance our economic development efforts. Access to better paying jobs, housing, quality education, and healthy community resources will encourage lifelong residents while attracting new neighbors. So some of the areas that we've incorporated from the investment strategy will be housing development and affordability, building a strong workforce, and enhancing cultural and recreational opportunities. And then securing our future. So we understand that place is the historic character and soul of the community. Preserving and enhancing what makes a community unique must be central in our growth and development. Access to parks, cultural amenities, restaurants and retail, and sustainable infrastructure systems will increase happiness, reduce community stressors, and foster safety. Some of the areas we will focus on is infrastructure development, neighborhood beautification, and economic environmental resiliency. The development structure of this plan will be a year-long process with the anticipation adoption by council in December of this year. So it will be broken up into 3 key focuses: community foundation and data analysis, community engagement, and the core team with the city of council. We will break this up into 4 specific phases. So we will be determining our position. So that's through data analysis. So BDAB already identified our industry clusters. We are now moving into demographic, labor market, real estate, and housing analysis over the next 3 months. We are gleaning existing plans that have already been adopted. So one of the key things that council wanted staff to do is to honor and to incorporate prior work from our citizen advisory bodies and their efforts through CCAP, through CAB, and all of the other advisory bodies. So we're incorporating existing strategies that have already been adopted. So CCAP will be one of those that we incorporate. Through June and September, we'll be developing that strategy. So Cyrus will be leading through BDAB. The focus groups, there'll be 3. August, there'll be where we build the plan. So we already have a foundation with the investment strategy. So it'll just grow into a more expansive document. And then hopefully by December 2025, we will launch this plan and then monitor the performance moving forward. The focus groups will be 3 sessions. It'll be where are we going and what do we bring? Where do we want to be and how do we get there? If you notice, somebody's on that photo. It was the only one, yeah. So basically, BDAB will appoint up to 20 individuals from the community and organizations to help lead that focus group. Over the next 3 months, Cyrus and I will be interviewing over 100 community organizations and businesses for stakeholder interviews. In the fall, we will do broader community engagement. So we want to not only incorporate those primary economic drivers, but we want to do a worker survey. So we understand that if the primary goal is to increase worker mobility for area income, we actually need to talk to the workers. We'll do a business survey. We'll do a couple of other outreach efforts with local entrepreneurship. There are a breakdown of our plan development team. This is kind of a unique approach to what most communities do. So we actually have 2 city council champions that will be a part of the project team, Mayor Pro Tem Perkins and Councilor Riley, who is also our urban renewal chair. The main advisory body will be the economic development, or BDAB. The project managers are Cyrus and I, and then we have a project team. So Cassie's a part of that. Kate, our executive policy officer, Carrie Bell, our middle income housing coordinator, Damian, who's in growth management, Carrie Carl is in disaster preparedness, Matt Stewart is in real estate, and Renee Mitchell is in communications. So the next steps, on April 21st, BDAB will identify those participants for the focus group, and then we'll also determine how to incorporate our citizen advisory bodies into the development of the plan. Between May and June, we'll be conducting stakeholder interviews, gleaning existing plans, and doing the demographic analysis. June 10th is our first focus group by public invite. It's open to the public. It'll just be focused on 20 individuals participating, but there will be an opportunity for public input. July 10th will be the second focus group, and then August 28th will be the third focus group. So the only question that I have today is what recommendations do you have for BDAB on incorporating ECC's input? And that doesn't have to be decided today, but that's the question that we'll be asking over the next month.
And so if anyone has just some like sort of initial, just initial reactions in general, specific things where you think there's like really close crossover with the ECC's work that you want to make sure we have in mind as sort of front and center. And like you said, there will be, you know, you'll have more opportunities to think about this as we sort of come back, but it would just be good to know if there's any sort of top of mind reactions.
Could you just remind me of the goal again of the whole work?
Yeah, so since 2020, this has been an identified council goal to adopt an economic development strategy, and this was reaffirmed in their recent 2023, 2025 goals. No, 2025, 2027 goals. The primary reason why we're incorporating that is because starting in 2026, we want to hit the ground running. We feel that there will probably be an economic downturn, and so we need to keep development going. We need to keep housing production going and job creation going. And second, it's to create opportunities for upward economic mobility for area workers. But the primary reason it's a council goal.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's one observation that's perhaps top of mind to me. So in our recent CCAP update, which should be adopted shortly, we added some new strategies in the transportation section, recognizing land use as a strategy. And that, I think, largely was driven by the state rules, the climate friendly equitable communities rules, as a means to, you know, reduce greenhouse gas emissions statewide and cities, including Bend. And in the city's climate friendly area study that Neil and I sat in on for the ECC, we outlined like some beyond just meeting the rules, the new CFEC rules, some other strategies for the city to hopefully take up about, you know, creating opportunities for the goals of a climate friendly area where people have amenities they need in close proximity to where they live to reduce VMT beyond just those climate friendly areas. So looking at other ways to change, you know, zoning, land use strategies to help enable some of that economic development in more neighborhoods across the city so people can reduce those like crosstown trips. I really like the focus and the sort of goals of the economic development strategy just outlined on place. And so something that occurred to me as you were talking through that was like, oh, there's an opportunity there to tie to some of our CCAP update strategies and that CFA work about like the spatial aspect of economic development and where and how we're targeting some of that growth that could hopefully have the effect of reducing BMT for more people.
Yeah, so one of the things we're excited about to have conversations with like different advisory bodies is, for example, one of the conversations we want to have with this group is how do you balance climate resiliency with the fact that 51% of our workers commute into Bend? And so there's going to be that kind of tug and pull and tension a little bit, but how do we blend what I think the broader approach is with being more climate resilient with kind of reality checks about where people are coming from. And second, and I was talking to Cassie about this earlier, so when you briefly provided input on the site-specific program last year, we had 4 projects, 3 are going to be doing high energy efficiency standards. So we're trying to meet existing planned goals, and so we're wanting to work with you on how to incorporate broader investments with those more specific tangible items that not only you have identified, but I think the council has identified as well.
I'll chime in. This was great to see. I really like how it's laid out. It's pretty exciting, and it's nice to know that Cassie and other sort of representatives will already be involved. So I realize this is the kind of thing that you don't want to get too cumbersome. Is it probably most natural to stay updated through you, Cassie, and engaged when you do come to these meetings, or like those focus groups, for example, or where do you anticipate sort of the natural engagement with the advisory bodies? I'm wondering if we need to be proactive in any way
So that's a direction that you'll have to your staff liaison, but
Okay.
I think at least for being informed and up to date, that will be primarily through Cassie. Because she'll be regularly a part of that engagement team, the project management team. As for like direct participation from the advisory body, we'll get direction from BDAB and council how they want to incorporate that. We continually hear about this broad continual engagement of like a summit that occurred a few months ago that seemed to be very well received and a lot of class.
That was our joint
Yeah.
committee meeting.
Yeah.
Like, or maybe there was that earlier advisory body summit.
Yeah.
But. Yeah, so I think the answer is we're still figuring out the plan of exactly how and when we engage the advisory bodies, but then since I'm on the project team, I'll be part of that discussion, so I can, so I will be the one being proactive about finding those opportunities, but it'll be like a discussion. Because other advisory bodies will want to be plugged in at the same time, so we just don't have that defined right now, but I think it's probably sooner than later, like sometime this spring or summer, and I think it will depend, like the council, BDAB could recommend the route of like, hold this other event where we invite a couple of representatives in to attend the way we did the joint meeting, or how there was like the earlier advisory body summit in January, or it could be something where we are able to plan something during our meeting time here to get specific feedback. So I think it's just going to depend a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about, like even BDAB meetings where would it make sense for someone here, like honestly, I'm very interested in this personally, and I know at the summit we talked about committee chairs potentially visiting other committee meetings more frequently, and if I don't know if this is going to become kind of the central focus of all the BDAB meetings, or if there will be certain ones where it would make a lot of sense. Yeah, Cyrus might be able to answer that better.
Well, I think just an idea of hearing you guys talk that might be helpful is prior to BDAB meetings, I can share with Cassie what's going to be on the agenda and discussed pertaining to this specific topic, because it will be on the agenda in some capacity moving forward throughout the end of this calendar year. So I can share those topics with Cassie and she can determine reaching out to different advisory body members, or just making the broader board aware of what we're going to be discussing, and then you guys can make the determinations on if you'd like to participate in those meetings or not.
Because obviously there are a lot of people and you don't want to, this could really sludge it up quickly, so.
Well, no, I mean, that has been a council directive. So if it does get sludged up a little bit, that is still their priority, is to incorporate as many voices from our advisory bodies as possible throughout this entire process. So that's something that we'll just work on. You don't have to worry about. But second is, on April 21st, Cyrus and I will be presenting like a kind of a broad outline of how to incorporate advisory bodies. And that'll be the bare minimum. It can always expand, right? So.
And to build off of what you were saying, Mark, I think we're increasingly seeing the value, I think as staff, council, and I think committee members, of the opportunity for you all to engage directly with the other advisory bodies, with the members of them, which I think is even different than you just attending their meeting, because then still you only have like the 2 minutes for public comment. So, and that's something we can talk about, is like whether that's kind of that summit concept would allow you to do that. So I do think that's, I don't know how BDAB feels about it, but I think it's something that hopefully we can talk about, an opportunity where we can have them sort of engage directly with each other. This topic feels like a really good one because there is all that nice crossover, and it could be a nice opportunity for committee members to like identify together where they have alignment with each other, and yeah, it could be really great.
Yeah, whether it's a bigger summit or sort of like super committee meeting, or like opportunity for written feedback, I think it would be helpful to have a clear, this is when we would like your expansive input, and this is when we'll discuss it. Because I think we had talked a little bit the last meeting about, can we do some sort of a crosswalk with, this plan and the CCAB, and try to highlight what are the places where we see the most overlap, and having an event to prioritize doing that exercise. It could be helpful.
Cool. Yeah, so maybe we would use some of our time in here to like prepare for that and discuss together feedback that could then be brought into like a joint setting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, based on council's recommendation and staffs that we're gonna be talking about with BDAB, we'd like to have a representative from AHAC and from ECC be in the focus groups that Jonathan was referencing. So those haven't been finalized, but we see that as a great opportunity to have that consistent type of touch point with the project.
Is it just those three or also more?
That was just those three.
It's CAB, BDAB, ECC, and AHAC.
Cool, that's great.
Because those are I don't want to diminish anybody else's role, but those are the four primary that have direct, tangible, like, investments into the community. But that doesn't mean that other lenses won't be applied. So I don't want to diminish anybody else's work, but you guys, I mean, obviously, a clean, healthy future. CAB is investments, BDAB is policy, and AHAC's housing. I think that's kind of a synonymous of what we're trying to accomplish.
I'll just chime in. A wealthier, more productive, more active and capable community is going to be able to achieve a lot of these ECC goals more effectively than a declining and recessive oriented community, which we're seeing other places.
Yeah. Good question. Is there any specific kind of feedback or like what kind of feedback would be most helpful?
I think today the only feedback that staff would like is working through your staff liaison is how would ECC like to be involved? Whether that be broad-based advisory bodies, a couple of summits throughout the year, or individual one-on-ones to talk and flow. I think maybe that would be the initial start, is to work with Cassie about like what each individual of you would like to see, because you're all appointed members by council. But then kind of working through Cyrus and BDAB, what's the broader approach with the advisory bodies? But for now, it's how do you want to be involved? And that doesn't have to be decided today.
But I think what we're hearing so far is like the focus groups is sort of step one. Interest in joining some sort of joint meeting, so that, which maybe happens in those focus groups, but maybe there's a need for an extra one, depending on how it all goes. Well, just depending on what those cover versus like if there's other like things that need to be covered, and then us using some of our own time in here, once we have a little bit more, because there's the borough investment strategy, but there's also the econ debt strategy. Part of it's gonna have new strategies, right, that are outside of that. So once we have some shape on those, we can use time in here to do that crosswalk, to talk about them. And that's something that we could potentially invite Jonathan and or Cyrus to come participate in if we want their help in understanding it, or we could sort of do it on our own. So those I think are what I'm taking from the conversation right now, as sort of some of those next steps. Does that summarize it well to you guys?
I still had a question. So I'm just trying to still better understand exactly what the outcome of this would be. And I saw the slides, but is it fair to say, because this is it growth oriented, so like economic growth basically, or considering all the other impacts as well?
Let me take a stab at this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think to sum it up in simple terms, the way
Yeah.
I have been describing this to people that seem to hopefully resonate is like, this is a roadmap to get us to an adopted strategy by December. So because we know all the work that it takes to get us to that point, we hope that this roadmap kind of shows what processes need to occur, what types of community engagement do we need, what types of data analysis do we need to do, to hopefully by December have an adopted strategy that will outline what the next 10 years look like, or what we're aspiring to get to. And so that is what we're hoping. This plan is what will occur between now and December, with that goal of December 3rd being when council formally adopts the first economic development strategy that we've had as a city.
I think what you were asking though
Yeah.
is it growth oriented? That will be determined what the community wants through this process.
Okay.
So I can probably assure you it won't be like an economic development strategy for my home state of North Carolina, which is sprawl growth and development. But I do think there will be a capacity of like, we do have to continue to develop, but how do we balance it with the overall natural impact?
Yeah.
And the growth plan is a big portion of that.
And that's, I think the key question is like, how do we want to grow?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah, growth is gonna happen, and are you going to be deliberate and try to achieve a diversification, equitable, like long-term strategic kinds of growth, or do you just let it go? I mean, it has been crazy that Bend hasn't had something like this already, actually. When you look at peer communities, they always do, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
I think that's helpful. Thanks for kind of summarizing it that way. I think the one thing that was coming to my mind as a kind of counterpoint, and I'm not very familiar with this, but I know I've heard a little bit about degrowth recently.
About what?
Degrowth, which I'm not an expert on, but I'll just read that it's degrowth proponents argue that modern capitalism's focus on perpetual economic growth is unsustainable and causes widespread ecological damage and social inequality. So I'm just curious how that can also be considered as part of the conversation when this plan is being put together.
Well, but that, we'll be more than happy to have that kind of conversation. I couldn't answer anything with that today.
I don't know much about it either, yeah.
But one of the things that we're doing right now is a lot of data analysis. And so we will actually, like Cyrus has already done good work with the industry clusters of who we want to focus on being more structured and strategic, but we will be updating our housing needs analysis, which will be like a housing market. Portland does something really great every year. They identify where the gap is starting to happen. So we did something similar to that last year. But to give you just kind of a context, and I don't want to continue with this kind of conversation just today, because I'm sure you have other things. But based on inflationary rates, our median home income by HUD increased by $23,000. So that's shifted the entire paradigm on AMI. So now we are starting to see more and more people fall off without eligibility. And so there's a broader economic system in this country that Ben cannot change. And so we have to operate in that reality as well. But I'm sure we can incorporate some more sustainable practices with overall growth.
That was
That might be
a really good answer.
conversation with me. When I used to teach environmental economics in Portland State, I had one whole lecture on this growth issue, and a lot of it, growth doesn't necessarily mean linear resource consumption. And realistically, as you look at how economies grow and flourish, usually there's less resource extraction, resource consumption. So it's something for us to talk about and think about sort of principles that ECC would want to bring
Yeah.
to this process.
Jonathan, you mentioned the housing needs analysis and where that's in the works in growth management department. What about the goal 9 economic opportunities analysis? Is that?
They'll be doing the same thing at the same time.
Okay. And will that feed into
Yep.
this city economic development?
Well, that'll be a part of the objectives with the strategy, but that will be its own entire growth management update.
Right.
So there's a lot of moving parts with overall growth management right now. And so this is just one like tentacle or leg of that stool. The other one will be the H&A, the EOA, and then the overall growth management plan that will update the comp plan and all that stuff. So there's like 4 different legs at the moment. And then the investment strategy, to your point, is just the hammer. Like, how do we invest using these strategies to accomplish the goals? So
That EOA economic opportunities analysis, just for my fellow committee members, it's on the land use side, how a city translates a forecasted job growth into a land need. So looking at whether there's land in the existing urban growth boundary, whether we need to add more land to provide for those jobs.
That's
that are
required by the
forecast over
state.
20
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
And the target sector analysis is hopefully in a way to have some intentionality around what types of parcels do we need, what types of industries do we expect to grow at what rates. So I think we're keeping our ducks a little more in order than we have previously, which is a good thing.
So I think our report to BDAB is ECC is very interested in this. and CAB's very interested in this as well. So I think with that suggestion, they'll have a better opportunity to be like, okay, start crafting a way to incorporate everyone's input.
Great. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
This slide deck, we can probably.
I'll send her my guys.
Yeah. that'd be
Okay,
great.
thank you.
Okay.
Are we ready for the next agenda?
Yes, but why don't we take a quick pause and get our lunches, and come back in like 5 to 8 minutes.
but
Okay, we are, we're unmuted. Okay, we're gonna get started back up. And I think, we're going to Cassie to hear about electrification policy next steps.
Yeah, can you hear us online, people, Nick or Michael or Counselor Norris? Want to tell us?
It's being recorded, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure.
Can you guys hear us?
Yes, we can, Cassie, thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay. So I wanted to, we kind of briefly, got to this agenda item last month, but I wanted to circle back to the electrification policy. This is a reminder, the, ECC, you know, you guys did that electrification policy work in the fall. In December, you shared a recommendation with the city council about sort of the approach to, the policies we want to undertake, related to encouraging building electrification. And then the council asked us to get additional feedback on, based on, kind of starting from your recommendation, but getting additional feedback from AHAC and BDAB in a joint committee context. So we held that meeting in February. The additional step that we took was that I was asked to, from the city manager to sort of like consolidate some of the feedback we had been getting, because we had been talking with BDAB and talking with AHAC to sort of consolidate some of that feedback. And also based off of his direction, based on the kind of risk analysis from the legal team, and also just like what he felt was appropriate in terms of the work, next step from a work plan. So basically, at the February summit meeting, I proposed kind of a staff proposal for next steps for electrification policy. And it is a little bit different than what the ECC had recommended in December. So when we met with that group in February, the discussion was mainly focused on the staff recommendation. We did get a sort of general agreement from the committee about that recommendation. There was, none of the committees were sort of opposed to it, which was nice to see. So I wanted to share with you all today that staff recommendation, because so basically that committee kind of gave us, it wasn't like an official vote, but it was sort of an unofficial endorsement of moving forward with this plan. We're going to bring it to council, like I said, next week, and get their endorsement of this plan. And if the council were to say, yes, we agree and support this approach, this will be what we do as our next step. So anyway, that's just kind of context framing. And now I'll kind of explain that to you. But does that make sense to everybody? Yeah.
I'm sure I'll have lots of comments.
Yeah.
In terms of like broad agreement with the work plan, I think myself, I can speak for myself, that I was not very happy with the work plan and the work plan process of like that additional step that you mentioned that Eric had asked of developing a work plan that really was in many ways responding to what the ECC recommendation was, and the process that we had in our recommendation of considering this pathway, moving down to the next pathway, moving down to the next pathway, that the proposal pushed those policy ideas to the we're going to wait and see thing. Like that seemed like a significant enough decision that it would have warranted something other. I shared this in the meeting, would have really appreciated having that frank conversation as a group, or figuring out what components of it might be valid or not. But I don't know, saying that everybody agreed with the plan at the ECC meeting when like it very much went not the direction that our recommendation went, seems like a kind of weird framing.
What went out of, what?
Well, I think it will help if I
You
just
can go,
explain
yeah.
it. I think that context
Okay.
will make more sense. And then it'd be good, Nick, if online, if you can also be sort of ready to share your report out from the February discussion. And Ray actually sent me an email with his thoughts too,
Okay.
so I can share those too. Okay, so what the staff recommended is, for next steps for our electrification policy work is that step number one is just focus on launching this outreach and education initiative. This is work that we're already doing. It's kind of overlapped with a lot of our other CCAP priorities anyway. But I want to make clear for, for everyone, including the council and other people, that like the education outreach work is, those are steps we're taking, and they do take resources, and we need a little bit of space and capacity to do those well. So the outreach and education initiative includes all the work that Megan's been doing to kind of build out our platform. We now have this platform that we can be integrating messaging and resources related to electrification. So that's sort of step one. That's a spring launch, doing it right now. Step two is that we're going to move forward with an energy navigator program. We've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes to kind of scope that out, and we plan on discussing that with you all at our next meeting. So we're planning on launching that in the summer, maybe the fall, but we're doing a lot of planning for that. So that's sort of step one. I have a line item there for builder education, because we had been brainstorming with some builders about the role that could play. I don't have like a really concrete initiative for that yet, but it's something that I would also like to incorporate kind of over the biennium, is like, can we do some targeted education at the builder community on electrification too? So that's step one. Step two would be that we would focus our next year or so really on developing incentives around encouraging electrification in buildings. That could be incentives and disincentives. So when I say incentives, it would be, we could look at development code incentives, we could look at financial incentives, and we could look at the climate, like something like a climate pollution fee as part of that bucket. We would develop that incentive using a public process that brings in the relevant stakeholders, such as the builder and the development community, and also the utility community or the utilities. And we would be using that stakeholder, of course, ECC as well, of course. We'd be using that stakeholder group to really dig into, look at some data and try to figure out like, what specifically should we be incentivizing in Bend to be all electric? And then how do we want to do that? And we'll kind of try to use some data to inform, should it be a development code incentive? Are there opportunities there? Should it be a cash incentive? If it's a cash incentive, like how much would that have to be, or how would that need to be structured to make it compelling? And then if it's a financial incentive, we would need a revenue source too. So we would have to discuss a revenue source. That's where a climate pollution fee could come into the picture. We've been talking in my conversations with Neil and several counselors as well. We could talk about the climate pollution fee even outside of the context as a revenue source, just as like on the merits of it as a standalone disincentive, which is sort of how we first framed it. We can talk about that too. So it doesn't only have to come there if revenue source is needed, but that one has kind of a dual purpose of being a disincentive and a revenue source. So that would be something where we convene, a group, and we have probably monthly meetings to sort of like explore this more deeply. We are recommending that we would continue using the joint committee of the AHAC, BDAB, and ECC. We could revisit if different committee members want to participate in that, since it's like a longer term commitment. But we'll also be building in additional public stakeholder opportunities for those other stakeholders to have their input in it. So I don't know exactly what that would look like yet. But where we would like invite developers to come in and weigh in at different parts of that process. And that will allow us to bring in those subject matter experts who may not have the ability to like commit to a long public process, but really like participate on specific questions and feedback, so we can get that feedback as a group. The utilities potentially would want to be involved, would potentially follow the whole process. So that's kind of step two, and that would be our big focus for the next year. And then step three is that for the regulatory pathways, which are the right-of-way restriction and the NOx regulation, our recommendation is that we keep those on the table for sort of a future step, but we don't really spend too much council staff committee time discussing and exploring those now. because of the high level of legal uncertainty. We talked a lot about how there's legal uncertainty and there's not that much more exploring we can do to get further clarity on that legal uncertainty. It just is uncertain. And so the only thing that will give us a little bit more certainty is time on that, because you can sort of see how things, the evolution of those topics in the courts. We can see if there's more precedent set in Oregon from other cities that do that type of, that want to go first. And so we would kind of, after we develop an incentive, we could revisit looking at a regulatory option. And we did commit to, we told the council we could commit to near the end of the year, like holding a work session where we sort of give an update on the legal context and where we think there might be opportunities or even bigger risks closer to the end of the year. So that's our staff recommendation. And as Neil sort of alluded to, I think the biggest difference from what the committee recommended was the committee's recommendation was sort of like, let's try to do those regulations before we spend our time on incentives, or it was kind of like, let's do it all at once. You know, we need to do both. And so I think the biggest shift is as staff, us saying that we think we need to just take more of a wait and see approach on the regulatory pathway and focus on the incentive. And the justification from my perspective is that if we're spending a lot of staff time, political capital, and resources on something, an incentive program has a more, a higher likelihood of having some sort of program at the end that has an impact and can be effective. We don't have that same level of certainty with the right-of-way restriction. We could spend a lot of time and ultimately, you know, not adopt something or adopt something and have it overturned immediately. So that's kind of our justification for that. In addition to other members of the community, you know, BDAB and AHAC included, being much more supportive of an incentive first approach too. So a little bit more community readiness for that as well.
Can I ask if, I think the way you described it of incentives and disincentives is very important. And those disincentives you described are almost a regulatory approach to some extent. When you say BDAB and others, are they open to the whole incentive disincentive? Is that an issue of debate as opposed to only paying or giving benefits for doing good things and not discouraging? And I wonder if that gets at all at, you know, your point at all, if they're sort of strong enough of sticks to go with the carrots.
In the joint meeting, no one came out like that's a non-starter. I won't even engage in this discussion if a fee is on the table. So that's why I think it will be on the table. That's our intention for this process, is that the fee will be discussed. In terms of like the individual feedback we've heard from them, you know, many of them say that they're not open to a fee. So, but it wasn't like the direction from the joint group was like, we won't engage if there's a fee.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece that, you know, it's somewhat semantics, whether that's like a regulatory approach or an incentives and disincentives category, because they all kind of intertwine. But seemingly, it seems like, you know, from our recommendation in recognizing the broad impact of like a big opportunity area, a lot of the background in this, a big opportunity area is making a significant chunk change in the new development that's happening. It's the lowest cost opportunity, the least opposition opportunity to be able to make a significant change in our building stock moving forward. And so that was where a lot of the ECC recommendation came from. And I would say, like, in the hierarchy of that the carbon pollution fee idea seems to be elevating, gaining acceptance. There's another city in Oregon that just passed theirs unanimously in Ashland with their city council. So we have a program on the table. There was definitely a lot of interest at, like, there was a fair amount of conversation about that. And so my concern with the work plan is that we are spending a year to look at all of the options of incentives when there's like a model that we could be developing and like really shaping, hey, is this let's have a conversation. Is this referring to residential new construction? Is this referring to commercial? Like that could shape things and totally change who the stakeholders are and what those pieces are. And like figuring out what that looks like for the city of Bend, I think would be a really concrete, useful, like talking about things actually happening. That seems like a very concrete and useful opportunity for us to do. And I'm worried that this timeline brings us to winter of 2026, which means a formal process that we've had of trying to figure out what we want to do for natural gas policy at the city will have been in place for 3
Well, winter
plus
twenty
years.
2026, meaning like a year from, you know, this coming January.
Yeah, but still like extending a whole nother year to then have to develop a potential policy to then implement and test. Seems like a long process. It seems like there's enough interest. I would be interested if that's where staff sees the opportunity from our proposal, or where council sees the opportunity, which they haven't really been able to give. We haven't asked them directly for that feedback. I would have loved for that to be the process. We give you a proposal, they give us feedback that's more concrete than go forward with these things and then give us, meet again as a group. We did that, but then like there's another work plan in there too. So that's my piece. I'd really love to see that accelerated and like specifically worked on. And I've been talking to Cassie of trying to find a way to do that too, because I don't want to be doing this for that long. I don't want to I want to build an effective program. Like every year we build 700 to 1,000 new homes. If there's a policy on the ground 1 year later and 80% of those are built with gas, that's like a significant amount of our new construction and emissions that we're missing every single time we wait another year. I want to start developing the policy sooner.
I'd like to ask Nick to chime in. He has his
Yeah.
hand up. Just any thoughts you had on the meeting and your opinion.
Yeah, I think just like one takeaway I had from that group was that a huge reason why we are not at least proposing to move faster, or like the city is not, is that there's still a lot of confusion on, is there a premium behind electrifying or not, right? Because that group's really focused on affordability. And I think there's just confusion because there are some data points that were brought to the discussion saying it's significantly cheaper to install gas, and therefore there's a huge incentive needed to switch to electrification. And then I thought Neil brought a lot of really good data saying, well, some of the lowest, the builders that are going for the lowest income constituents of Bend are electrifying. And then there's other, various reporting from RMI and others saying that no, electrification in most jurisdictions is cost competitive, maybe even cheaper in a lot of cases. So I think ultimately getting to a clear answer on that question of like is the relative cost is going to drive this faster. And I think that came up as like an initial thing that the group needed was bring in more voices who can answer that cost premium question. And I think once that falls into place, a lot of this stuff felt like it would move faster. And I do think that we sort of left it saying, yeah, a year out is too long. So let's move this faster. I don't know, Cassie, if that's like been discussed more and if things have been pulled forward explicitly, but that was one of the points that we left that meeting with was, yeah, everyone's in agreement. This needs to move faster.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing up the cost discussion because it's a good segue. I'd like to read what Ray sent. It was similar. He said these are his thoughts in a nutshell on sort of the takeaways from that joint meeting. He said, I was not surprised at pushback to the original proposal on cost grounds. The business development and affordable housing feedback was very aligned with what I'd expect to hear from a median voter. In that context, I think the staff recommendation was totally appropriate and I support it. I do think it's critical to get clarity on the issue of whether and when electrification is locally cost effective. My recent experience tells me that it often won't be. That's not to say that the council can't choose to mandate or require things that are not cost effective, but I wouldn't want them to do so thinking that they were lowering residents' cost of living. recently this has got me thinking about the importance of affordable electricity in all of this. I don't know whether it's appropriate to include that as part of the plan. But some expression of this has to be affordable to make sense, could hold value. Which I think, and I know that I think Nick, even at one of the previous meetings, you brought up that like the cost of electricity needing to play a role in that. So that was Ray's perspective on it. So I think that he's right and Nick's right that like a central question is like, how expensive is this? Because there is some perception from some people it's super expensive, and there's some perception from others that it's like way more cost effective. And there really is data that will tell you either thing. And so that's sort of when I'm thinking about framing up the incentives process, that was going to be the first question that I tried to get good data on. But I think the answer really, well, it depends. It really depends on probably each individual development, but I think my hunch is that there are some similarities based on like building type, like commercial building versus deed restricted affordable versus middle housing, single family versus multifamily, like whether it's cost effective is different for each of those. And so my hope is to try to find data that can where we can answer that, but it's hard. It's hard because the different reports out there are often from these sort of like higher level data sets. And so it's really hard to get like specific bend data because each development is also so different. So that's something I'm trying to like wrap my head around how we can find that. I don't know. There may be some people in this room that might be able to help me with that. And I'm talking with other departments that work with that work in housing more. But I see that as being sort of like one of the first meetings with that joint committee will be like, this is the information we have about the costs across these different building types. And what does that mean for, I guess you could start it as looking at what it means for whether we should incentivize this. If there's differences between those building types, it might give clarity on like what we should be incentivizing because there's some lower hanging fruit and some higher hanging fruit. And then also it'll give us information about how large an incentive would need to be to like overcome, to be a compelling incentive basically. So that's sort of how I've been thinking about it. And I do think the cost question was number one, but hard, it's gonna be hard, I think, to get good cost data that like everyone is satisfied with. So that'll be kind of a trick. And that's one of the reasons I see the public process not starting until the fall is not because we're just not doing anything until the fall. It's because we need to like we need to have some good information to start that discussion. So that we can like quickly move into a meaningful discussion. So I'm needing some time to do that.
Is that data collection, we're limited to sort of staff resources on that? Is there any?
No, we could hire out for that for sure. We have some resources to do that. We have parametrics on hand. They're sort of like, because they helped with phase one, their contract will allow us to work with them for phase two. But I do think that I want to make sure it's really locally driven with local data, and you don't always get that when you work with an outside contractor. So I think that like, I want to wrap my head around what we really need. Because often at the consultants will use that sort of broader data set, which we may have to rely on that for certain things, but if we can find something a little bit more specific, I would like to.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I think Javi had his hand, then Rory.
Is yours quick?
Yeah. it
Okay,
is.
go first.
I'm assuming yours is not.
Well, it just has two parts to it, so.
Early on in the meeting, I believe it was in staff updates, he talked about meeting with the council stewardship committee, and I think Mark mentioned that in that meeting, at least one of the counselors directly asked us as the ECC something about this issue, why we hadn't in our priorities for goal setting talked about electrification policy and regulatory approaches and all that. Can you clarify what that conversation was?
Yes, just asked for a little more clarity on why the right of way, and I think implicitly natural gas regulation wasn't listed as a priority, and we discussed the legal uncertainty and the cost associated.
And I think what Counselor Platt was asking, because advanced electrification policies is part of those 7 priorities. But since we haven't introduced all of this to them yet, it's like a little bit out of order.
Mhm.
So I said, we'll talk more about it later, but the short of it is that we would be primarily focused on this incentives process. So his question was just like, does that mean, I didn't hear anything about right-of-way restriction and the NOx regulation. Does that mean that that's not what will be worked on? And I was like, yes. And he was like, let's make sure when you share this on the 16th, that's like, because it made it, I think just because of the way it was structured, it made it seem like I was sort of like glossing over that, which wasn't the intention. It was just like for this particular presentation. So when I present to them on the 16th, it will be, more, it will be more transparent. Like I'll say what I just said to you all, that we're recommending, that we don't pursue those 2 regulations now, basically, in favor of focusing on the incentives process. And the incentives process will be discussed as exploring all those incentives, not just like developing a fee. So it will be their opportunity to tell us if they want us to take a different direction for that. I can share with them, but before I do this, I'd like to maybe even have like a hand raised so that I can sort of, if I'm sharing this a specific direction, I can share with them during my presentation that the ECC independently, like, doesn't support this proposal,
That was my next question. Sorry, Cody, this is turning.
That's okay.
You're framing this as sort of a staff recommendation. Is this? But of course, there's input from multiple committees. So is this, it's not just an ECC recommendation, it's not just a recommendation from you, from the ECC, it's a broader.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, I'll say it's a staff proposal that we shared with the joint summit group, the joint committee group, AHAC and BDAB and ECC, and that group generally, not 100% of people, but the general agreement from the group was that they were comfortable moving this forward. We didn't take like a formal vote at that, since that's not like a formal body, which makes it like a little bit harder, I think. But we did have 3 counselors there, Counselor Riley, Norris, and Perkins. So they'll be able to sort of chime in with like the direction that came from that group. Yeah.
Yes, so I just wanted to kind of make sure I have a good understanding of this because I've not been very involved on this issue, but I guess my understanding is this came to the full committee, this went through a whole process with the separate working group. And I guess first, I want to say what I'm hearing, what I think I heard from Neil is there's like 2 pieces to it, I guess, is one is not happy necessarily with the outcome of it because it doesn't reflect exactly what the ECC at least had proposed and we took a vote on. And then second is not being happy with the process of it in terms of how the staff piece of it was brought to this meeting, but it wasn't the full ECC recommendation presented as it was. And I don't know if that's a fair way to kind of summarize the 2 pieces of it. And on the first piece, I'll just say that I think I was the only member to actually abstain from that vote. So I don't have super strong feelings on this. But I do hear some of what I've heard on both sides of this, especially the economic impact side too. But on the process side, yeah, I am kind of curious. It does feel like we took all this time to pass a set of recommendations, but it seems like that was not specifically brought to this super committee meeting in its original form. It was amended by staff
To
input.
clarify, Neil had the opportunity to share the ECC's recommendation, plus AHAC and BDAB both also were tracking that whole process, and we had individual meetings with them where we shared the ECC's recommendation, so everybody did hear it. Neil had a chance to sort of recap that. It was quick. I'm not trying to say that like, but what didn't happen, the question was not like discuss ECC's recommendation. The question was, you heard ECC's recommendation, here's the staff recommendation, discuss the staff recommendation. So Does that make sense?
But was this the first meeting with the joint committee or super committee? So it seems like it was I guess I don't know if the intent of the first meeting was to like everyone brings the recommendations and have an open discussion and then the staff takes that and then forms something, or because I feel like the moment staff brings in recommendations, it's kind of like weighing on it, right? Like it's not a neutral between the three different committee members.
Yeah, this was the direction. So council said, you know, go talk to these other advisory bodies about the ECC's recommendation. I was directed by the city manager. Let's create this staff recommendation because it was applying an additional lens. It was one synthesizing the feedback that we had already gotten. And then it was applying an additional lens from the city manager and staff input to say, this is how we recommend moving forward.
It also sounds though like with Ray and Nick were at that committee also, and they were generally supportive of the staff plan. I don't want to put words in Nick's mouth. It sounded like Ray was.
Ray was, I don't know, Nick, I think. Yeah, Nick, you can chime in on whether you have like a firm opinion on like support or not a support.
I think the regulatory piece makes sense because there has been a fair amount of failed plans to move forward with some of the stuff we recommended, like lawsuits have been lost, right? So I do think that the city waiting for more legal clarity makes a ton of sense. That's my opinion. I personally, I mean, what I literally said at the meeting was, I think the timeline on number 2 is too long, and that we should challenge ourselves to move faster. Because if we lose another year, we just probably are not going to hit our 2030 carbon reduction goal, right? I think we are just running out of time to get in front of this. And so that was kind of my opinion was, I think the ordering makes sense, but I think the timing of 2 needs to be pulled in a lot. And that was what the group sort of all agreed to was, yes, let's find ways to move that faster. So that was, I think roughly what I feel is what we discussed there, but has not changed on this slide quite yet.
So it sounds like the super committee probably got somewhat of a mixed signal from ECC representation there is the reality, as opposed to a really strong ECC joint voice that worked.
Yeah, agree with that. Like Ray, you know, said pretty much what he said in the email that I just read aloud. That's definitely.
I think, and some of the challenges that I had with this is like a lot of the concerns that Ray has brought up have been talking about commercial properties. And like, I had just wished there was opportunity to say like, hey, if that's what we're talking about, then let's have a conversation of that. It seems like we're generally pointing towards the direction of new construction residential, but if that's where the conversation's going, it's a completely different question of cost, right? Like cost got brought up there about residential, it also got brought up about commercial. Like we can have that conversation, we can set those things aside. So I also just want to maybe try to recharacterize. I'm not like, the sky's not falling. I don't think everything's broken or like the process is dead or anything like that. And like most of this, I'm super supportive of. Everything in number 1, I'm supportive of. Number 2, I think one potential outcome of that is a policy that I would super support and was like in our highlighted ECC presentation that we've talked about for a really long time. We've gotten outside legal advice for like super supportive of all of those things. It felt, this was a new process. It did feel like, from what I heard city council ask, and then those presentations to then have a formalized work plan that we weren't able to see ahead of time, did feel a little weird to come into, because it did seem like it was a decision of, it felt like there was a more formalized decision of direction from our recommendation. I don't know, this isn't necessarily feedback for just Cassie or just Eric or council, but just like, we've always had a question of what does the actual process look like of policy advice from advisory boards to council and back. And it seems like there was an attempt to do that. We gave a recommendation, they wanted more feedback. We went for the feedback, but then it felt like there was a shortcut there. And we've talked about this a lot, so I don't need to like process is fine. So yeah, formalized or like kind of summarizing all of those things. I think the main thing that I'm interested in is if we want to get something figured out, I don't think that it necessarily shortcuts looking into other incentives. If we formally say, this is a policy that we could consider, that it seems like there's direction towards of a carbon pollution fee similar to the city of Ashland's, that fits with our recommendation that we had come up from the board, seems like the least objectionable from staff, from legal, and from the conversation that we had down there. And I would prefer to formally look at evaluating that sooner rather than having that start after looking at all the other incentives, which I think are important, but I don't think the scale of the impact of looking at impact fees and other things on areas that aren't as cost effective, like commercial construction, are gonna, I think the scale of that doesn't match the, you know, the level of it being a council priority and being on our CCAP update. So that's my general summary.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I was gonna say I support what Neil just said.
One more quick question, maybe it's even a Nick kind of question. The same way there's concern about cost as a driver for the pace that any approach could take for new construction. I know we've heard often, and it sounds like from input from the utilities, that grid readiness is a concern at all. And the same way we're investigating what the reality is for local cost data, is there more clarity we can get on grid readiness and maybe a pace for that? Maybe Laura would even know who to ask on those sorts of things, or if it's a lot squishier than that, in terms of sort of a pace that, like, are there thresholds where all of a sudden there'd be some real constraints on the ability to supply new construction that's 100% electric?
I don't think that it's that clear cut even for them necessarily. The message that I've been getting from my main contacts at Pacific Power is, in the scheme of what they have challenges providing power to, any like residential within the city of Bend, they just have less concerns over, because it's really the big, huge loads that are coming on in the region that create the problems. But that's not to say there can't and won't be problems even at the residential level, because it all kind of depends how things develop and how new loads are coming on. They are investing significantly in increasing capacity in the area. They have a bunch of the local, the projects that have been sort of impacted by capacity right now have been some of the local substation upgrades that need to happen, because there's sort of like capacity challenges at the local substation level and then also at the regional transmission level. So they have a plan to upgrade all of our substations over the next 10 years. And their statement is that as those are made, the problem will become less and less from a local level. There are issues at the regional transmission level. And I actually had to miss, there was just a meeting yesterday about Pacific Power is bringing in a big transmission line called Project Blueprint. And it's going to run kind of to the east of our town. So, you know, there's a lot of people that have concerns with, you know, anytime there's like new power infrastructure coming in, it can be kind of controversial. But once they get that in, and I believe that timeline is more like 5 to 10 years, that will address a lot of the regional sort of transmission level constraints. So all that to say, the message is sort of like, we're getting constrained, we are constrained, we have plans to sort of fix all of that over the next decade, but there could be challenges even on the way there, depending on the sequencing of things, depending on how quickly things develop versus how slow they develop. There could be sort of these like intermittent challenges that they'll try to get ahead of.
It seems like if we have all of this kind of supply and cost clarity improved, and there are increasing marginal costs on the margin for electricity generation, also for different kinds of electrification, like say new constructions, lower costs than existing retrofits. And I don't know, different kinds of housing, different kinds of commercial, different kinds of geography in the city. if there's an approach where you can have this sort of supply cost forecast that has some temporal component to it, and you can start thinking about, you know, almost as a compromise, looking reasonable. We should be more aggressive, sort of regulatory standpoint or disincentive standpoint for this sequence and this set, and then that has sort of a temporal process as the grid catches up, and maybe even as other technologies catch up. I
think
know
that
you're
there's a
keeping-
scale of that in some regard of just appliances last 20 to 30 years. So in terms of like timing and building to the capacity and of both the transmission grid, but also the renewables on the grid. So we're talking about a 20 and 30-year timeline. So any new building constructed right now is doing the exact same thing, but in the opposite way. So it's committing to that.
Mhm.
And like you have turnover with a 20-year, that's a 5% turnover every year, if I did my math in my head correctly, right? So that, like big picture wise, there's a localized impact, especially if you're talking about new construction and greenfield development or smaller infill, but like, you know, there's definitely a distribution impact of that that's very acute, but broad scale wise, this transition is a multi-decade process that I think is part of why you don't hear the same concern of residential electrification as you do from giant individual loads. You do big picture wise by the utility hear impacts of like trying to make whatever that is as low impact as possible. So that's saying, hey, if you're electrifying, it should be a heat pump, not baseboard heat, right? Or like the most efficient piece, or like Pacific Power is also building out more demand response stuff to try to make it so that when there are grid constrained times, they can potentially adjust thermostats or adjust your heat pump water heater, like those types of things.
Could I ask one quick question? Go ahead.
Well, I just have a quick time check because we have 20 minutes left. We did have one additional agenda item to get to that. It's less time sensitive. I think I just want to make sure. So I'm going to present this to the council. I think I can kind of share with them some of the general discussion you've had, but just to kind of like make sure the committee feels okay about where we're at. I think your options are to either, you know, I'll share this, I can kind of share a little bit of the discussion for them. You guys haven't, I don't think I can promise that there's like an opportunity to speak at that meeting just because I'm not really in charge of that. You definitely would have an option if you want to write a letter. So I would say that's like the most, if you guys are looking at this and enough of you are like, I'm not comfortable with this, or I want to like really make sure we have a moment to say something else, you guys could write a letter to council that could be submitted next Tuesday or Wednesday. If we want to go in that direction, you would need to all, by the end of the meeting today, at least agree on the main things that letter is going to say. And then we could write that up, but we would need to do like a vote on that. So that's one direction we could go. The other direction is to just keep this as, you know, as is. Those are my ideas for right now. And if, you know, if we want to continue discussing that, we can kick the Climate Action Partner Grant Program to next month. I don't think that would be, that's not going to like mess anything up too much. So any thoughts on like, I guess trying to get a gauge from the whole group, like to what extent do you guys want to say something to council different than what I'm going to say?
I feel like the one thing I heard from multiple members of that super committee was the timeline being moved up for the number 2. Is that something that there feels broad agreement on? And is there a reason that was not considered, or is it possible?
When we're talking about moving things from the fall to the summer, like it's not realistically, that doesn't do much other than give us less time to be well thought out and prepared to hit the July 1st meeting instead of the September 1st meeting. It's very hard to kind of meet a brand new group in the summer anyway, because people are traveling. The other thing is that the reason I put it towards the fall, you know, is so even within an additional person, we're trying to launch 2 additional programs this fall. We have an additional outreach and education program, or I mean this summer, that we're, you know, running right now. So the hope was to have space to launch both the Climate Action Partner Grant Program and the Navigator Program, which I know we haven't talked about, so it's probably not super top of mind for you all. So that's my main reason is to give us space to do those things. If we wanted to say we really wanted to bump it up, we would need to put off probably the Energy Navigator program, which is not terrible. We could do that. Anyway, the point is there's trade-offs to capacity.
Yeah.
And moving things up just a couple months is often not that meaningful in the time frame of the project.
And is it not actually, I mean, winter 2026, that's not December 26, that's like.
No, I know it's, I always confuse people. when
I'm
I do
seeing
that.
it this number too,
So I wonder if
yeah.
people are thinking it's farther out than it actually is.
Yeah, I'm envisioning like a 6-month process.
Okay.
We always envision 6-month
I
processes.
can't
like
imagine going
2-year
faster than that
processes.
or starting sooner than that, honestly. personally.
Like, yeah, that's sort of where I'm
Yeah.
at. Like, we could maybe hold a first meeting to say we started it sooner, but I do not think it would meaningfully. help us.
No, and maybe that addresses my concern. I guess I was thinking that's more than a year from fall 2025
No,
to
it's meant to be
2026.
like September through February,
Okay.
March.
So I think it was more based on what I heard from Neil, at least saying that there is a model we can look at from Ashland, and it seems like there's some of this work was already done in terms of what kind of fees or what kind of opportunities are there, and it seems like that's the one that's being maybe considered more. It could be a shorter process in terms of that. So if it's
Yeah.
6 months, then that seems
And I think what Neil's concern is that this plan process is we're gonna look at a whole range of incentives. And we're not gonna start at like, hey, let's develop a fee together. We're gonna be like, what and how should we incentivize? So there will be more time taken. So there's a chance that by the end of this process, we might only land on, we should make a fee. And then there's like an additional process. That was sort of Neil's point, is seeing it like take a lot of time, as opposed to starting in September to develop a fee and then by March having a fee. So the council has not directed us to create a fee yet, and we need them to do that before we could like comfortably do that.
And
Is there-
timing wise, real quick, and Nick had mentioned this and we had talked about it at the committee. I think the committee also had volunteered itself to be like, hey, if we don't need to formalize something bigger than this, and this can be an informal body, like if there is a specific topic that would help to be able to start a more formal process in the fall. I don't think that's necessarily starting the process earlier, but if it would be helpful, I have a feeling that super committee probably could meet again in June to
Yeah.
give feedback to help with the planning over the
We
summer.
have talked about that,
Yeah,
actually,
so-
that was one of Eric's ideas, is that we can be in like once earlier, but again, like, so we can say we'll start it earlier, but.
And I think that's
Yeah.
just a question, like, as you're developing, if it's helpful, like,
Yeah.
that doesn't. I don't know, that seems like a lower lift. I don't think it's just trying to say that it's happening earlier. I
Yeah.
think like knowing how long it takes to develop and get ready for those things.
Yeah.
If there's some early feedback that would be helpful
For
for
sure.
that, I think the committee, that group was like, well, we can come back in a couple months if that's
Yeah,
helpful.
thank
So I think
you.
that's
And
more of
that
an
is sort of the
invitation.
plan, because I think the other thing that's hidden when I say we start in fall is like as if we're not working on it from a staff perspective, but really that to me was like the public process starting in the fall, and it just does take months to prepare for those.
Can we just say September to March instead of saying fall to, like, just so other people don't have to get
Well, we try
confused?
to be a little softer because
Right.
it could be October, you know,
Well, and 6-month process also can take 9 months or a year.
but I can
Yeah.
say September, but.
It doesn't.
I ran out of
Sorry,
time.
Alana.
Two quick things. One, I feel like there's probably a subset of the list of options that the ECC analyzed last year that could be sort of like the starting point. Maybe it's not one, but it's sort of like, here's what we already have information on in terms of incentives and fees. And then for your presentation, Cassie, given the cost issue, how prominent that discussion was in the February meeting, like adding a bullet to number 2 that clarifies that that's something staff is going to be looking into ahead
Yeah,
of that
the cost
process would be
effectiveness.
helpful.
Thank you.
But to your key question, well, I want to make sure that we're all on point here with a little time left. If we want to try to make any statement, and if, you know, it still feels like a very mixed signal across the committee overall, and maybe not very clear. If there's still value to individual member comments, you know, like if Neil wants to be able to put something forward, does he have a pathway to do that without it being something that's approved, you know, some kind of majority vote by the ECC?
Well, he or any of you could just email the council and say, I'm a member of the ECC. I would just make sure to be
But this is a
clarifying
message
that
from-
you're,
Yeah.
that you're not speaking on behalf of the committee.
Or maybe even multiple committee members.
Yeah,
in one.
like you could have multiple committee members do that, and then they would understand, like, okay, multiple of them felt this way, but they didn't like make a joint body decision.
'Cause it doesn't feel like in 10 minutes we can get to
Yeah.
something clear enough to vote on.
I agree.
Yeah, I think if we were looking for feedback on this, I think it would have been helpful to have talked about, I know we had a packed agenda last time, but like we could have reconvened the electrification group to respond to the work plan. Like more formally, or even just the 3 members that were there, so then
Yeah.
we could have brought something more formalized, but I agree, I don't think we're at a point where we would, like, you heard a lot of the conversation here and we'll be able to summarize.
Yeah.
And if I don't have my Zoom up, but if Counselor Norris is here as well. But yeah, I don't think it's straightforward enough to be able to write something and do it as a committee, so I'm happy not, or I don't think.
But like, if you want a minute here to see if anyone else wants to join you to write something, if anyone feels strongly or clearly enough, but.
Yeah, that's where I was gonna jump in. I would join such a message from some number of ECC members, largely in alignment with what Neil,
Smaller.
and Covey has agreed to. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, sorry, whatever. Some subset of ECC members. I just think the time is now. We've talked about this for long enough. I do feel the ground has shifted a little bit with
Mhm.
ECC's role in this. And I think it's worth those of us who agree voicing some of this to council directly. I appreciate all the concerns from the other committees and costs has to be considered. But, I'm just thinking big picture, there are so many forces, especially from the federal level right now, trying to stymie climate action. It's really on to state and local governments to be bold and be at the forefront. I want Ben to be in that position. And I think we should move forward with a climate fee.
So we'll have like a few of you will write like a joint letter from a few of you. Is that what I'm hearing?
As individuals,
As individuals together.
collective individuals.
Multiple signatures.
Well,
Yeah.
are we sure it's not? I guess I don't know how many others have interest in it, but yeah, I was just wondering what number it gets to.
Maybe
I
anyone
guess
get in
I
touch with Neil.
assumed that
It's less than the,
People join Neil if they want.
okay.
Reach out to Neil. Is there any reason we can't say that?
What was that?
That people can coordinate with Neil if you're okay doing that.
Well, Michael, I was wondering if you could weigh in on, so they want to, I don't know if you followed that, but they want to write like a few individual members from the ECC want to write a letter that won't be from the whole ECC because they're not making like a joint recommendation here, but they want to like collectively from a few of them write a letter. Is that okay to do it that way? As long, if they're or 3 members of the ECC writing this on behalf of the 3 of us.
I think what you need to be careful about is that you're not communicating with each other as a quorum when you're writing these letters. So if 2 of you write them as individuals or one of you write it as an individual and another one signs on, that's fine. As long as you're not acting as intermediaries and talking with each other. It could get risky if you were talking with each other and then a letter gets written, even if it's only signed by 1 or 2 of you. So is that the advice you're looking for, Cassie? Trying to understand exactly what the committee members are envisioning.
We're just in a tricky spot. I don't think that it doesn't seem prudent to write a letter on behalf of the entire committee without the ability to actually review and sign on as a committee between now and next Wednesday. So
Yep.
that seems like whether it's that, I think process wise, we could agree on. We've done that in the past. So process wise, I think that would be legitimate, but it doesn't seem like it's a good idea. And so we're
I would be
trying to say a handful of individuals that's smaller than quorum will write not as a committee, not because there's dissent, but just because it's a weird timeline to be able to not we're not trying to shortcut that
too. I do.
So I think
go
ahead, Kelsey.
Thing is that not everyone is 100% on the same page.
Yeah,
which is part of that bit and a weird timeline.
Then just I would, for the groups that are writing, make sure that you're just writing within your group and that it's not a number that exceeds a quorum and that the groups are not talking to each other. That's where it gets risky.
Yeah.
And then be very clear in your letters that who you're representing and who you are, and that you're not representing the body. I would caution, several competing letters from several minority factions of the committee. I'm not sure that's going to have the impact that you want, but it is legal if as long as you're not acting as intermediaries between the groups, i.e. not talking across the groups.
Quorum, is that just majority, 6, 5?
Majority.
So as long as we like under 5, so 4 or fewer people.
Great.
What is the letter saying?
I think that's what you have to sort out.
But
That's what we can't sort out.
that's, and I think, Kavi, I think that's what I'm getting at. You aren't going to be organizing your letters outside of the meeting, because if you talk to each other in a group that's larger than a quorum to figure out what the letters are going to say, who's going to write, even if that letter is signed by 2 people or 1 person, it really does start to look like you're communicating or deliberating outside of the meeting as a full body. So that's what I'm cautioning against. So if 2 of you decide to write a letter, but aren't organizing it through the whole group, you of course can do that. But leaving this meeting and then talking as a quorum about who's writing what letters and who's signing starts to cross the line.
I think what we can probably say, it sounds to me like most likely the key recommendation from the letter would be to move forward with a fee. Is that kind of what you're thinking, Neil? Since you've identified as one of the leaders, like,
Yeah, I think
just because I'm thinking this way people can decide here in the group who wants to, reach out. And then if it's more than quorum.
I think a fee and a message like Rory had shared just about this is why we think we should we should take significant action, and that the fee was in our original recommendations, but is something that we think we should formally be looking at sooner rather than later.
One idea, it just may be cleaner procedurally. I don't know if it's what you want to do, but one idea would be to figure out what the letter is going to say and take a vote in the next 5 minutes. And if there is a majority, then the letter can be written on behalf of the group. And if not, then not. And if any of you want to write individual letters, of course you can, but that will avoid the problem of trying to coordinate as a group outside of the meeting.
Yeah, if those 2 pieces, like, which I think is a more broadly accepted view from this conversation, it's not just a letter of me and my opinions, although I did bring that concept up. But if that is something that there is more general support for, then we could actually write it on behalf of the committee.
I guess I'm missing the semantic personally on the fee happening sooner than September, October being something to be.
I think the recommendation, correct me if I'm wrong, Neil, would be that rather than like exploring a bunch of incentives on a bunch of different housing types, that the recommendation would be to just begin the process of developing a fee in the fall. And then the letter will also say, give the justification, focus on the importance of local, strong local action.
If I may, there's 5 minutes left. I move that the ECC write a letter to City Council for their next meeting, 16th, that states these 2 points. The city should move forward with developing a climate pollution fee this fall. And 2, because it's a high priority in the adopted CCAP. And the urgency of the climate crisis demands strong local action.
I second it.
Any other discussion?
I guess this is discussion, but for the first part that Rory mentioned, I guess we could add, if council has concerns of moving forward without doing a little bit of analysis of it, that could be part of the moving forward part. It's just like doing some of that research and just seeing that it's still a good fit for our community, because I know it's already in Ashland, but also making sure it's going to be a good fit here. I don't know if that needs to be added there because it might be complicated, but I just want to mention that for discussion.
There's a lot of fee design that would have to happen in the fall. This would take
Right.
a lot of process in the fall still. Right.
Yeah, and that's part of my hope is like those conversations, like very concrete conversations of like a fee design of like, what is the social cost of carbon that we want to use? How do the revenues get used? where would it, does it apply? Where does it not apply? Those are really important community conversations of figuring out how it fits here. And I just think that that's valuable to have if we're doing all this organizing, to have those conversations in that group, but that focused.
Would this proposal limit consideration of incentives in parallel, or are you proposing? Like, is it ensuring, like, fully limiting scope to development of a fee? Or is it ensuring that development of a fee is part of the broader conversation of incentives and disincentives to
No,
encourage?
it already was gonna be that, so we
Right.
already had committed to the discussion of a fee as being part of the discussion of the full
Right.
suite of
Right.
incentives and disincentives.
So yeah, if
I just could see if incentives are what a lot of the larger committee is looking to talk about. There may be some. things to
Sure.
work through.
And the difference is, because here there's this whole stakeholder process and an analytical process, and you want to skip past that and get right into design. Is that?
Yeah, 'cause the
Still
question
using a
is,
stakeholder
this-
group.
This process,
Yeah,
the question is, how should we incentivize / disincentivize? A fee is one of those options. There's a handful of other options. What Neil's recommending is that we still pull together a stakeholder group. It might be a slightly different stakeholder group. I'd have to think about that. But the direction would be, and council could make this direction. They could say, develop a fee similar to Ashland's. And then we will not be talking about development code incentives. We won't be talking about cash incentives, like, $15,000 towards a heat pump or something. We would be developing the fee. We could look at those other incentives later, but like this process would be developing the fee.
Why couldn't it happen in parallel?
Because
I think
like, it's just,
looking at the whole body in parallel is two separate tracks, right? But a carbon pollution fee has a revenue source that I think the request, whether it was explicit or
it would,
not,
yeah,
would be actually using that for incentives.
it's true. It
So
would
I
just
think-
be staggered.
Yeah, that could be a
It would kind
staggered
of-
piece of that is
yeah.
developing the fee and developing the incentives,
Part of
whether
the
those are
discussion-
together
Part of the
or,
discussion would be like, what does the revenue go
Yeah,
towards?
Okay.
Yeah.
But it, I mean, it is kind of like, a carbon tax versus cap and trade, that you could also do this for like transferable development rights or something. You could have like some kind of cap and some credit, like there are other mechanisms and there are legitimate trade-offs between those.
Mhm.
I don't know if the subcommittee had clearly already decided that the fee was the most appropriately aligned with sort of objectives. along
I
those
think
lines.
the
Kinda like
electric.
tax versus credits.
We just don't have a lot of our residential development is not in high rise things where transferable development rights or other tax increment financing, all the tools that the city has identified don't address a lot of where the residential development piece is happening. So that was why this had been identified by the group. But those are still important opportunities too.
I realize we're probably need to have a vote though, it's already at 1:02, so.
We should, yeah.
Let's have a, so all those in favor of. Should we say a letter by the ECC that is both encouraging or promoting directly moving towards a climate fee program? Sorry, what was the other element? How would you articulate it?
Because it's a priority in the CCAP and the urgency of the climate crisis.
But the letter is only focused on, so that we have changed, that's the
Just
only
one thing.
which it's only climate fee, okay.
Yeah.
So the proposal, so we'll have the vote on a letter by the ECC supporting directly progressing towards development of a climate fee. So all those in
Can I-
favor?
On the voting, can we confirm that there'd be language about that as a revenue source?
It
And
would be
also
used for an incentive.
Right,
Like a revenue neutral intention.
Is that an
ultimately.
amendment to the motion?
Yeah.
Maybe someone
I
else
think-
should make the motion.
So
Yeah.
Rory made a
Rory-
motion and he
Rory
said
made a
similar
motion.
to Ashland's, and Ashland's does use all of the revenue for low income programs. So I think it would, whether it's informally okay, or whether you want to make a formal amendment, that it would be a carbon pollution fee similar to Ashland's, where the revenue is used for incentives. I think that totally could be, that seems like a reasonable request. I would support that if we want to do this formally.
Does Michael have
Michael has
something to
idea.
say? I see him on
You have
the
something
camera.
to say, Michael?
No, I'm here depending on where you land on amending the motion or not,
Would that
just in,
require an
just in
amendment?
case.
I don't think he's
I couldn't
actually-
tell from the original motion whether it was agnostic to how the fees would be spent. But I agree that if the original motion was similar to Ashland, I think the idea was that it would be put back into that program, so doesn't need a change.
And maybe he didn't actually say that.
I think he's got it. I'm not 100%
Yeah.
sure it was fast. You can.
I think
Do it.
Just
it's
restate.
fine. I think
I rescind the motion.
Sure.
And I move that the ECC write a letter to council for the next meeting. Recommending the city develop a climate pollution fee similar to the city of Ashland's. That uses the fee to incentivize electrification. Because the CCAP called its priority in the CCAP and urgency of the climate crisis.
I second it again.
Any more discussion? We'll move right to a vote. Okay, although,
I
I'm sorry.
would
Laura.
just state now that I am employed by the agency regulating both gas and electric utilities, I'm going to abstain from votes on electrification issues.
Okay. So all those in favor? Please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do we have anyone online?
Nick's hand is not currently raised.
Okay, and quorum for us for this to pass is 5.
Can you raise your hand
How
again?
many people do we have attending today? Or how many are online?
I think
One on.
honestly, I feel like I need to think about this more, so I'm glad I'm not making or breaking the vote, so it sounds like it passes. At
We have to
5.
take like a no vote too.
I should take a no vote, I guess.
Okay.
Okay, I'll
Anyone
so
opposed?
any opposed, so Nick? Can we see Nick?
His hand is still not raised. Nick, do you have a vote on this motion?
No, honestly, it was a little hard to track.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm tempted to abstain myself, actually.
Okay.
I might
Well,
abstain.
to clarify, we're not allowed to abstain. Just because we're not really supposed to abstain, just because we
Okay.
can't decide. Yeah.
Okay, I mean,
It's come up-
it's
it's
very,
come
it's
up
very
before.
quick, and I'd love to, because it is kind of an aggressive. I don't have to talk about it,
Like,
I'm just saying,
if-
I'll just say
if
no,
you're
I'll be bold and say
undecided-
no.
If you're undecided, it means you're not yet at the point that you support it. The vote should be no.
Okay, I'll say no personally.
Okay,
So,
does
yeah,
that change,
5
does
to-
that change yours, Nick? I know you like actually probably can't hear that well, so it's a little.
I think I'm in the same boat. I think I'm not there to a yes
Okay,
right now.
no vote then.
Okay,
It's okay to have,
yeah,
no
no
vote.
votes, sure.
and it doesn't mean that you're like, hate this thing. It's just that you're not ready to vote yes on supporting that.
Right, okay, so it passes, I believe, though, correct? And so process
Rory.
wise, Rory's going to write it, Rory and Neil are going to write it. Okay. Is there anything else we need to settle on this, or is the meeting adjourned? I guess we didn't get to any of those other things. Okay.
Next meeting, really quick, next meeting, we'll talk about the Climate Action Partner Grant Program, and then we'll also plan on talking about the Energy Navigator Program in May.
Awesome.
It'll be
Okay,
great.
all right.
Thank you.
And we'll have follow-up from the council discussion on this topic, so.